Africa, a continent brimming with potential, bursting with natural resources, and home to a young and vibrant population. From the bustling streets of Lagos to the serene savannas of the Serengeti, Africa is a land of diverse cultures and breathtaking landscapes. Yet, amidst this richness, a stark reality persists: the glaring disparity between the haves and the have-nots. Picture this: soaring skyscrapers casting long shadows over sprawling slums, gleaming luxury cars navigating pothole-ridden roads, opulent shopping malls standing in stark contrast to dusty roadside markets. These are the jarring juxtapositions that characterize the economic landscape of many African nations. The truth is, Africa is a continent of stark contrasts. While a select few enjoy immense wealth and privilege, a vast majority struggle to make ends meet, trapped in a cycle of poverty that seems impossible to break. This, my friends, is the harsh reality of the wealth gap in Africa. Now, some folks might hear wealth gap and think it's just a fancy term for some people having more money than others. They might imagine it as a simple difference in bank balances where one person has a bit more saved up than another. But the reality is far more complex and far-reaching. And sure, on the surface, that's part of it. The wealth gap does involve disparities in financial assets, but it also encompasses much more than that. But the wealth gap runs much deeper than just the size of your bank account. It's about the stark contrast in living conditions, where some people enjoy luxurious homes and others struggle in makeshift shelters. It's about the unequal distribution of opportunity. Imagine a child in a well-funded school with access to the latest technology and resources compared to a child in an underfunded school with outdated textbooks and overcrowded classrooms. It's about the systemic barriers that prevent entire communities from accessing the resources and opportunities they need to thrive. These barriers can be physical, like fences and gates, or they can be more subtle, like discriminatory policies and practices. Let's talk numbers for a second, because numbers don't lie. They provide a clear picture of the extent of the wealth gap and its impact on society. According to a recent Oxfam report, the wealthiest 1% in Africa own more than the bottom 90% combined. This staggering statistic highlights the extreme concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. Let that sink in for a moment. Think about the implications of such a disparity. How does it affect the lives of those at the bottom of the economic ladder? A tiny fraction of the population holds the lion's share of the wealth, while the vast majority struggle to access basic necessities like healthcare, education, and even clean water. This isn't just a matter of inconvenience, it's a matter of survival for many. This inequality isn't just morally wrong, it's economically unsustainable. When wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, it stifles innovation and economic growth. It creates a society where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. When a large segment of the population is trapped in poverty, it stifles economic growth, fuels social unrest, and hinders the continent's overall development. People working in harsh conditions, abandoned factories and schools are all symptoms of a deeper problem. So, how did we get here? Well, my friends, it's a complex issue with deep historical roots. The legacy of colonialism, systemic discrimination, and economic policies that favor the wealthy have all contributed to the current state of affairs. Understanding this history is crucial if we are to address the wealth gap effectively. To understand the wealth gap in Africa today, we have to take a trip back in time. The roots of this disparity are deeply embedded in the continent's colonial past. Colonialism, my friends, that's where it all began. The arrival of European powers marked the beginning of a long and painful chapter in Africa's history. For centuries, European powers carved up Africa like a birthday cake, exploiting its resources and people for their own gain. They drew arbitrary borders, often splitting ethnic groups and communities, sowing seeds of conflict that persist to this day. They stripped the continent of its wealth, leaving behind fractured societies and economies designed to benefit the colonizers, not the colonized. The extraction of valuable minerals, the establishment of cash crop plantations, and the exploitation of labor were all geared towards enriching the colonial powers. Think of it like this. Imagine someone coming into your house, taking all your valuables, and then forcing you to work for them on your own land. This wasn't just theft. It was a systematic dismantling of local economies and social structures. That's colonialism in a nutshell. It was a brutal system that left deep scars on the continent, scars that are still healing. And just like a house that's been ransacked, it takes time, effort, and a whole lot of rebuilding to recover from that kind of exploitation. Post-independence, many African nations faced the daunting task of rebuilding their economies and societies from the ground up. The legacy of colonialism is still felt today. The infrastructure left behind was often designed to extract resources rather than to support local development. This has had long-lasting effects on economic growth and stability. Many African countries are locked into extractive industries, exporting raw materials at low prices while importing finished goods at inflated costs. This pattern of trade, established during the colonial era, continues to disadvantage African economies. This unequal trade relationship perpetuates a cycle of dependency and hinders economic diversification, further widening the wealth gap. To break free from this cycle, African nations are striving to add value to their raw materials and develop their own industries. There is hope on the horizon. Across the continent, there are growing movements towards economic self-sufficiency and innovation. Local entrepreneurs and businesses are leading the charge, creating products and services that cater to African markets. Education and skill development are also key. By investing in the next generation, African countries are building a foundation for a more prosperous and equitable future. On the global stage, African leaders are advocating for fairer trade practices and greater economic cooperation. The journey to overcome the legacy of colonialism is long, but with determination and unity, progress is being made. The spirit of resilience and innovation is alive and well in Africa. Despite the challenges, the continent is forging a new path, one that honors its rich history and looks forward to a brighter future. Section 4, the rot within corruption and poor governance. Now, I'm not one to point fingers, but we can't talk about the wealth gap in Africa without addressing the elephant in the room: corruption. When corrupt officials siphon off public funds and prioritize personal gain over the needs of the people, it's the poor who suffer the most. Imagine this: a government receives millions in aid to build schools and hospitals. But instead of reaching the intended beneficiaries, the money disappears into offshore accounts, leaving communities without access to basic services. This, my friends, is the devastating reality of corruption. Poor governance and a lack of transparency exacerbate the problem. When institutions are weak and unaccountable, it creates an environment where corruption can flourish, further undermining efforts to bridge the wealth gap. Section 5. A bridge too far: education and the skills gap. Education, they say, is the great equalizer. It has the power to transform lives, uplift communities, and drive economic growth. It is the foundation upon which a brighter future is built. But what happens when access to quality education is a privilege, not a right? When the very tool meant to level the playing field is out of reach for so many? In many parts of Africa, millions of children, especially girls, are denied the opportunity to reach their full potential due to poverty, conflict, and a lack of investment in education. These barriers create an environment where dreams are stifled and potential is wasted. Imagine this: a young girl with a brilliant mind, eager to learn and make a difference in the world. She has the curiosity, the drive, and the intelligence to achieve great things. But instead of being in school, she's forced to stay at home, helping with household chores or working to support her family. Her days are filled with tasks that, while important, do not nurture her intellectual growth or feed her aspirations. Her dreams, her potential, left unrealized. She watches from the sidelines as others receive the education she so desperately craves, her heart heavy with longing and frustration. This lack of access to quality education creates a skills gap that perpetuates the cycle of poverty. Without the proper tools and resources, these children are unable to develop the skills they need to succeed in life. Without the necessary skills and knowledge, young people are ill-equipped to compete in the global marketplace, limiting their economic opportunities and widening the wealth gap. This not only affects their individual futures, but also hinders the progress of their communities and nations as a whole. Addressing this issue requires a multifaceted approach. Investment in education infrastructure, teacher training, and learning materials is crucial. Equally important is the need to create policies that ensure all children, regardless of their background, have access to quality education. Communities must come together to support their schools and advocate for the rights of their children. Parents, educators, and leaders all play a vital role in bridging the education gap and creating a more equitable future. By working together, we can ensure that every child has the opportunity to learn, grow, and achieve their dreams. Education is not just a privilege, It is a fundamental right that should be accessible to all.